Jimmy Kimmel tries to humiliate Jeff Bridges on live TV. His response changed the situation. The studio lights were blinding, the audience was buzzing, and the late-night cameras were rolling. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward in his chair, his trademark smirk spreading wide. Across from him sat Jeff Bridges, the dude himself, calm, relaxed, with that gentle smile that seemed to belong to another, slower-paced world. Jimmy was known for being cheeky with his guests, but tonight he had something different in mind. He held a stack of cue cards, each with questions designed not just to be funny, but to poke, prod, maybe even embarrass. "So, Jeff," Jimmy began, "I heard you once forgot your lines so badly on set, the director considered replacing you. Is that true, or are you just, old?" The audience laughed, some out of habit, some out of genuine amusement. Jeff didn't flinch. He chuckled softly, eyes crinkling. "Well," Jeff said, "I guess that's true in a way. But forgetting lines isn't the worst thing you can do in life." Jimmy leaned back, sensing the opening to push further. "Oh, then what is?" Jeff's smile grew warmer, almost nostalgic. "Forgetting people," he said. "Forgetting that behind every camera, every spotlight, there's a human being with their own story." The audience quieted a little, the laughter thinning. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly deep for late-night TV." Jeff leaned forward now, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy. Years ago, I was filming on location in New Mexico. I messed up my lines, badly. The crew was frustrated, we were behind schedule, and I was feeling pretty useless. During a break, I wandered outside and found this young kid, maybe 12 years old, standing by the fence. He told me he'd been waiting all day just to meet me. Said my movies helped him through his dad leaving. I didn't have anything fancy to give him, but I sat with him for half an hour. Asked about his life, his dreams. Years later, I got a letter from him. He'd become a social worker. Said that day taught him people still cared, even when the world didn't." There was a pause in the studio now. The cameras were still rolling, but no one dared break the moment. Jimmy tried to recover, still smiling, but it was softer now. "So, forgetting lines doesn't ruin a career." Jeff laughed. "Forgetting kindness ruins a life." And that's when something unexpected happened. One of the camera operators, a grizzled man who'd been with the show for years, put his camera down and gave Jeff a slow clap. The audience followed, the sound swelling until it drowned out the set's usual soundtrack. Jimmy looked at Jeff differently then, not as a target for a punchline, but as someone who'd just given his audience something more than entertainment. He'd given them a reminder. The rest of the interview was easy, almost joyful. Jimmy asked about Jeff's music, his painting, his charity work with children. It was as if the tension had melted into something human and warm. As the show wrapped, Jeff stood, shook Jimmy's hand, and said quietly, "Thanks for letting me share that." Jimmy hesitated, then replied, "Thanks for reminding me why I started doing this in the first place." When the episode aired, the clip of Jeff's story went viral, not because it was scandalous or shocking, but because it made people feel something. It reminded viewers from New York to London to Vancouver that the smallest act of compassion can ripple farther than we'll ever know. And maybe that's why Jeff Bridges, in that quiet, unshakable way of his, walked off that stage not as a guest who'd been humiliated, but as the one who'd changed the whole room. Message: you can win an argument with wit, but you can only win a heart with kindness. A week later, Jeff was back at his ranch in Montana, tending to the horses when his phone buzzed. It wasn't a manager, a studio, or a reporter, it was a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he'd let it go to voicemail, but something told him to answer. "Mr. Bridges," a woman's voice said, warm but trembling. "You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. My husband was that boy you talked about on Jimmy Kimmel." Jeff stopped in his tracks. "He passed away last year," she continued, "but before he did, he told me about that day you sat with him. He said it was the first time in years he'd felt seen. And every single kid he worked with at the shelter, he tried to give them the same kindness you gave him." Jeff felt his chest tighten, not with sadness exactly, but with a heavy, beautiful ache. The woman sniffled, then added, "I just thought you should know, your kindness didn't stop with him. It's in dozens of kids now, and probably hundreds someday. Jeff stood there in the crisp Montana air, the horses shifting quietly beside him, and realized something. The interview, the applause, the headlines, those were fleeting. But this was the real legacy. That night, he called Jimmy. "Hey, pal," Jeff said when the host answered. "I've been thinking. Let's do a whole segment. Not about me, but about everyday people doing little acts of kindness. No politics, no jabs, just humanity." Jimmy chuckled. "You're really trying to ruin my reputation as a smart aleck, aren't you?" "Maybe just soften the edges," Jeff said with a grin. 3 weeks later, a new segment debuted on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Kindness on Camera. It wasn't slick or overproduced. It was real. Clips of strangers paying for each other's groceries, neighbors shoveling snow from each other's driveways, a teenager fixing an old man's bike for free. The ratings, through the roof. But more importantly, letters started pouring in. From Seattle, from Manchester, from Halifax. People saying they'd started looking for ways to help, even in small ways, because of a story they'd heard from. That night Jeff Bridges talked about kindness. By the end of the season, Jimmy's show had raised enough through viewer donations to fund after-school programs in 3 different cities. And every time Jeff heard about another kid being helped, he thought back to that boy at the fence in New Mexico, and how a 30-minute conversation had become a movement. The night it all began, Jimmy had tried to get a laugh at Jeff's expense. Instead, Jeff had given the world something worth keeping. Final message. A single moment of kindness doesn't just change a situation, it can change the course of countless lives you'll never even meet.